So it's a great privilege for me to be here. Thank you, Moran, for asking me, and Rachel for making it happen. I'm really excited. And I would start off with an ask of Moran, because I read, if everyone sees the curator's statement on your flyer, the first paragraph really spoke to me, and I want to read that and ask for the inspiration and maybe just a little insight into tonight's show. So you don't have to read along. This exhibition seeks to explore travelers, capital T, journeys and destination. We talked about vectors earlier for you physics people out there, which I thought was great. And ask how they changed each other. Each artist brings to the exhibition a perception of travel that's tied to their experiences. Each offers the audience a moment of meditation on how travel can influence them, their destination, and their idea of somewhere, end quotes. That really meant a lot to me, because all of my travel has really influenced who I am today, very much. So tell me about that.
I think that's almost a global truth. The idea of this somewhere, it came from, I don't know if you guys got to read the blurb that's on the wall there. I don't know if the quote at the top, I don't think it appears in the thing. There's a quote from Alice in Wonderland where, sorry, this is too close to me, I think. Oh, closer, okay. So the Cheshire Cat asks Alice where she wants to go when she asks him which way to take. And she said she doesn't care. And when he says, well, which way to take depends on where you want to get to. And in the end, they agree that as long as she gets somewhere, it's okay. And I really liked, so that quote kind of came after the exhibition idea already existed. And I really liked how that quote, that moment, which is something that I guess Lewis Carroll does a lot in the book, it detaches the meaning of the travel from the target of the destination. So you can travel without having a destination. You can create a destination out of your travel. And I think a lot of times it's something that we actually do. And I think specifically, I suppose, when explorers, this is something that Edy and I think, had a chat a couple of years ago, almost at this point. Explorers used to go and find new continents. And a lot of times, the definition of these continents came from the fact that they traveled. And
that's right.
At the time that they were traveling somewhere, in the way that things are written on a cosmic level, they were writing the future history of that new place that completely changed from the moment that they decided that they were going there. But that was one of the reasons that this theme sort of came. I really did try and think about who is going to look at this exhibition and what can it mean for them. So yes, that's part of the story.
That's great. I'm so happy to see it. And make sure everyone gets the chance to go up the elevator, or stairs, I assume as well, to the multiple floors and see all of our artists' works. So I'm going to start with a softball question for everyone, for Ellie and Leanne and Edy, and that is, why are you an artist, and why do you do what you do? And just your closest, so it's an easy question. Why are you an artist and not something else?
Oh.
I told you it's an easy question.
Well, I guess I am the kind of artist that I am. I classify. The term I've used is a walking artist, based on when I was younger, this obsession with, if I'm going to travel, I have to go abroad. And I would go abroad and people would be like, oh, you're Irish. My uncles, nephews, whatever.
Everyone's a little Irish. Right?
Or they're in Ireland, or they traveled to Ireland just for a month and fell in love and spent 6 years there or whatever. And it kind of got to this point where I decided I had to kind of experience that and understand it for myself. So I wanted to walk and explore and kind of share my understanding of the place as somebody who was from there, and that has really kind of inspired my art. Does that count as an answer?
And for those of you who don't know, tell them the literal traveling.
So I've spent
Method.
the last, since 2016-17, walking long distance trails around Ireland. I've probably walked 4,000 or 5,000 kilometres in total, along all the different ways and trails, and really exploring.
You walked all of them, literally, right?
Yes.
Yeah, not figuratively. She walked all of them.
Yeah, which trails have you walked in Ireland? All of them.
Well, during COVID, one new one has opened, which I haven't got to yet.
Uh-oh.
So I have to quickly swoop back down. But yeah, so there's some people might have heard of like the Wicklow Way or the Kerry Way. They're kind of famous Irish trails, and there's about 42 in total that cover 4,000 plus kilometres. Plus then routes I've made up myself, deciding to walk from my family home to where I was currently living, or experiencing Ireland in ways.
Wow, that is a great answer.
As a young child, I'd always been somebody who was drawn to visual imagery. So I learned much better by looking at things, and I went through my daily life kind of learning by seeing. And I was always very good at making things with my hands. And for a long time, that just came naturally to me because of the community that I'd come from. I think were very good with their hands in lots of different aspects. So I'm an Irish traveller. I'm a member of the Irish travelling community, which is the only indigenous ethnic minority in Ireland. And I suppose secondly, to answer that question, the reason why I'm an artist is because when I was a young student in school, primary school, secondary school, and even third level, I remember quite consciously looking at the curriculum or listening in class and thinking that certain topics related to who I was, but actually I wasn't being reflected in the curriculum, and I couldn't actually see myself, and never did I feel that my community was being named or identified. So as I went through third level and began to come more aware of who I was as an individual and also as an artist, I began to consciously create artwork that represented my community in an authentic way. So for a long, long time, I had researched community and found work, whether it was written or visual, but always produced by an outsider's perspective. And I, unfortunately, didn't always agree with it and felt that it might have been obscured or framed in a certain way that I didn't agree with it or didn't feel that was genuine. So I'm on a mission with the last number of years, trying to create work that I feel is that bit more genuine and authentic.
Fantastic. And if everyone turn your head 180 degrees, this is Leanne's work on the wall back here on a beautiful white backdrop. Wonderful. Edy,
Yeah, hello.
why are you an artist, and
Um,
why do you do what you do?
yeah, I guess in brief, I first began in architecture, and then I suppose I've always loved to be creating. I guess with architecture, the training sort of is design oriented, so in a way more tailored towards like a problem solving mentality, where I think art or visual art or other sonic forms of art sort of create the space for questioning, and yeah, I guess I've always been inquisitive about things surrounding or life encounters and everything, and I like that art gives that kind of space other than sort of design and architecture sort of closing a bit of a gap rather than opening up for more kind of possibilities. And
That's one. I've worked with architects a lot in my career and been with art my whole life. I've never heard it phrased quite like that, and I love that about architecture solving problems and art instigating questions? I'm kind of paraphrasing what you just said there.
Yeah, I have simplified a bit. Obviously, it's more than that, but yeah, we
Because beautiful
we
architecture
kind of-
can also inspire as art, of course, but I didn't know that about your background. That's wonderful. Be sure to go up the mezzanine and see the work that's installed that way, specifically for that space, is that right?
Yeah, it's a new work that was created for that atrium space, yeah.
Mhm. And you have to be very quiet to listen to it, right?
Quiet and patient. It loops. So sometimes it is just quiet. So if you can't hear it, just give it like a minute.
Yeah, it's intentional.
I
Just give
know.
a bit of a
Just need to give it time.
break for the ears.
And Moran, why do you do what you do? I know your role here, if you can call it, is curation, of course, of what we're saying. But maybe take that aspect of your artistic career. How did you get into curation?
I got to do curatorial practice professionally through my PhD because I moved to Ireland and wanted to research political art and very quickly realized my direction in terms of political art in Ireland that was very different from sort of when people talk about political art in Ireland, or at least that was like 15 years ago. The first thing that they ask you is about murals in Belfast. And when I arrived in Ireland, I landed and the economy crashed immediately. And so there
Nobody
was a
blamed
lot.
you for that.
I didn't do it. Hey, I came from New York, so whatever I brought with me. But there was a lot of politics to respond to, and there were a lot of young artists in Ireland who were responding to it. And somehow it wasn't fully considered political art at the time because it wasn't about the Troubles. And in academia at the time, there wasn't a lot, if any. I was finding trouble finding academic research about political art in Ireland that wasn't about the Troubles. But also found out that being a complete foreigner to a place and a culture, I found it difficult to create political art about Ireland. And wanting to look into it, I started looking at what the young artists were doing and curated a few exhibitions as part of the research, and telling stories through creating art places became an interest of mine in curatorial practice, kind of thinking about who is going to look at the work, what is the right story to tell them, because I don't really believe in people saying that like the audience is stupid and they don't care about the art because they don't get it. Like if they don't get it, we didn't do a good job explaining it. Or maybe they don't care about it because this isn't the right art for them. So I really try and negotiate the artist's intentions and interests with the audience that they're going to place right from the beginning. So not as you make the art and then we'll put it for the audience, but like really asking who is this for from the very beginning.
I love doing these things because I'm going to go off script now because you just inspired me.
Okay.
No, I was just asking some artist friends about this. I think it's a very old question about does the artist's intent matter? And
It's a big question.
yeah, specifically, so I'm going to ask that question of you. And thank you, by the way, to have these three brilliant
guys.
artists here. So different in your execution. So yeah, off script, so I'm making this up as I go. But to you individually, does it matter your intent? Like I love those stories that you just told. And I fall on that side. I love, maybe I can see a piece of art first, let it absorb, but then I want to know that story. I want to know where and why and when and who and what. I just love that richness. But some artists I've found are very strongly one way or the other, will not even have an artist's statement or description of the work. I did this piece for this reason, in this place, of these people, for this reason, or not. So I'd love to hear your answer to that. Does it matter to you about your work?
Yeah, I think it's kind of integral to a lot of artwork, and for mine in particular, because a lot of kind of representations of Ireland have a very specific look, especially the kind of Irish landscape. And so sometimes when people are asking me to kind of explain the theories behind some of my work, I'll ask an Irish person what do they think New York looks like. And you can kind of imagine their answers. It's a lot of Times Square and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then I'll ask them about some other country, especially because a lot of Irish people have not been to New York, and they'll give a very specific answer that's kind of tailored to the tourism of that place. And then I might ask them what they think, let's say, an American person thinks coming to Ireland. What visual imagery do they have in their head? And I think that really informs what people then go and look for in a place.
Oh, did it meet their expectation?
Yeah.
Oh.
And so what I found is, like, when I'm walking, there are some places that are particularly famous, and I'll be slowly approaching a place, and it will go from being this kind of landscape, I don't want to say wild, but kind of natural experience, to this one focal point where everyone comes to take the same image. And when you look out from that point, it looks beautiful. But when you look at the surrounding area, the impact that everyone has had coming and taking that one same photo again and again has really scarred the landscape, or done different impacts. So I've been trying to photograph the Irish landscape and kind of have conversations about it without perpetuating this cycle of kind of whistle-stop tour of the 5 main points, and this is the only representation of Ireland, and kind of. So I think it's very important.
That's great. I love it.
For me, I suppose in the early days, the intent wasn't so important, because I was very adamant I was making my work for me, and it was almost a diary. It was what was inside my head was being reflected in my artwork, and it was almost therapeutic, I think, because in around the time I began to create work seriously, I had a lot going on, and I was very, very aware of the, I suppose, tensions that were present between my community and the wider community in Ireland. So for a long time, I was a little bit afraid, I think, and apprehensive of pushing myself out there and pushing the work out there, in fear of what I might attract upon myself.
Because it's specifically identified that way?
Yes. But as the years went on and I began to realise, oh, actually, I have a voice here and I can create awareness around certain things, I began being more intentional with what I did. So, for example, some of the pieces on the wall there are from a body of work titled Accommodate versus Assimilate. And that body of work was inspired after a tragedy that happened in Dublin, where 10 members of one family died on a fire. It was an unofficial halting site that was manned by the council, and it was supposed to be temporary, but it had been there for in excess of 10 years. And what happened afterwards, when those people were buried and they went back to their hometowns, those hometowns basically shut down and said, have your funeral, but ultimately you're not welcome here. And something similar had happened to me at my own grandmother's funeral. So I was very inspired at that point in time to create that body of work, to create more awareness around the topic of accommodation within my own community, at a time where the topic of accommodation was very prevalent amongst the entire community of Ireland. But I think when it became a bigger thing, it kind of compounded our issues, and people forgot, actually, we've been experiencing these issues for in excess of 40 to 50 years. So that's just one example. So as the years have gone on, I am quite intentional with the concepts and the topics of the work that I create.
Nice. Excellent.
But with that said, actually, what I do have to point out is I don't ever claim to speak for an entire community. And I'm very, very, very strong on that.
No, yes,
Yeah.
staying personal.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Edy, what about you? It is important to you? Disagree with us, that'd be great. Yeah, we love the background, but tell us that it doesn't matter.
I guess it varies between works. I suppose what I'm thinking in my mind when I work sonically, then sometimes you, so I also do sound performances as well, then you kind of bring audience into sort of like a journey, a narrative journey, but then obviously people will have different kind of takeaways. And yeah, and I tend to think that, you know, once you finish creating the work, then everyone's free to interpret the way they like, and maybe a bit like you an author, once you finish the book, then yeah, and you don't own the narratives anymore, if that's what you were asking. But yeah, I think, say, for example, that work over there was called Negotiating Laplace's Demon. Yeah, initially I created sort of playing with how Laplace proposed sort of this super intelligence that know everything that happens in the universe, and knows every single point of time and space. That sort of I initially wanted to question about determinism, and then play with kind of as a representation of graphic scores that open up ways you could interpret that score and then read it the way you like. And then 1 year later, I got this opportunity to show it again under this curatorial theme about time, and I actually have different reading over my own work and different reflections, and so yeah, sometimes you also deviate from your own intent as well, and I think it's a very positive
that's a good
way
point.
to sort of read yourself in a different way. Yeah.
That's another great quote.
I
Somebody
have
write that
something
down.
to add.
An artist deviate from your own intent.
I have something
I've heard
to
that from
add.
authors a lot. Yeah, but
So I never have descriptions and blurbs, and often I don't have the names of the pieces in curatorial projects.
Good, excellent, an outlier. Excellent.
There's a printout or a map that you would get from that, but never the paragraphs, because most of my curatorial projects are like in combined spaces. So when it's telling the story,
Right.
it's a visual story that you're told, and maybe I'm a little bit of a control freak. You would normally understand the story through the title and the visual work. And I like to leave that little opening for interpretation, so it's not like as tight as possible.
Yeah.
But in this exhibition, so I wrote with the artists, but all of the blurbs are either newly written or rewritten to fit the story of the exhibition. So every piece that you see is like a big globe that has a big story, and we're sort of looking at a facet that puts them in the same story that's in between them. So there's always more than the context that's in the blurb. The blurb is taking you on a specific journey throughout the pieces, but if you take your time and kind of experience each piece separately, there's more in there. There's always more in there.
I love this. We could talk all night about this. Because I realize, just from having heard what you all said, it makes me work a little harder, maybe.
Yeah.
If I can't, like I go into a gallery, where was I? What city was that? LA. In San Francisco, in galleries, and I was just at the MoMA last weekend. And if I go into a room and you don't have the blurbs, I find myself being slightly frustrated. Like, I want to know, so when was this taken and where exactly? Because it's not, almost your work reminded me of that a little bit. I'll stop talking about how fascinated I am. But, because my next question is how do you do what you do? And I don't mean technically, but maybe how do you focus yourself? We know why you do what you do now. And I can maybe start with you again. That most, I think, of your pieces upstairs, at least in this show, or I'll call them kind of medium shots. I'm a cinematographer for movies and animation, so I'll talk in. So you don't see kind of broad landscapes as much, and it's, for me, your work gives me a little bit abstraction. Like, I know they're in Ireland, but they could almost be other places. So how do you do what you do? Is that a very conscious decision about framing? How have you chosen how to do your work?
So when I'm walking, I don't have any parameters. I don't have okay, I have to take this many photos per day or this many photos per week of walking or whatever. It's been a quite, I think, natural development where when you have a wide landscape, it's like, oh, that's kind of beautiful, but it's not really speaking to the experience itself.
Right.
Whereas I think my photos here all kind of reflect moments of the journey. When you're kind of looking at a landscape, it can be beautiful, but it's not really giving you any sense of where the walk was or where I was. And each kind of trail is very, like, each person's experience is going to vary purely even just based on the weather. So I might love a trail and somebody might go back a year later and be absolutely washed away, and they weren't even able to see any of the views or the vistas or whatever. So I think maybe
I should have noticed that. I don't mean to interrupt, but most of the photographs almost have a slightly downward angle, so you can, I don't know if that was intentional, like you kind of see the ground more than the sky?
Oh, that's very true.
See, told you.
Yeah. Yeah, so yeah.
I didn't mean to interrupt.
No.
It was just
Yeah, it's very true. Yeah, I guess it's just kind of the style that developed over time as I walked more. So
How about you, Leanne? I noticed in the writing that you use pigment with the photographs in the description. Is that a style that you've developed? How do you work? How did you get into your style? Because it's very distinct. It's very ghostly. It's abstract and representational at the same time. So
Yeah.
how did you get to this point in your?
So throughout my years in college, I spent a lot of time drawn to lots of different processes. So I love to paint, I love to print, and I love to photograph. And I could never decide on where I wanted to end up. And then I realized I don't have to decide where I need to end up. But what I was trying to achieve in each of the processes that I was working in was a certain visual, and I knew I wanted it to look a particular way. And back in those days, the way I used to describe it was, if you've ever had a dream and you wake up in the morning and you can't quite remember what it was, but you can remember elements of that dream and you're trying to piece it back together, that was the visual I was trying to create. Because a lot of the work of the time that I was trying to create was based on my memories and the memories of my childhood. And then when I achieved that visual, I was like, okay, this is it. And I decided to stick with it. Because what's the word? It pleases me on many levels, I should say. So I'm quite satisfied with the visual because, and I think it was great what you were saying a minute ago, because I was like, oh, that's what my work does. I intentionally tried to invite the viewer in to ask questions. And the reason I do that is because I've quite often seen very stereotypical images of my community portrayed in many spaces. And the reason I haven't gone out and taken in-focus photographs is because I don't want to portray a certain type of image to anybody. I want you to come in, I want you to ask questions, I want you to figure out what's in there, what's going on, and whether there's a blurb or not, that's what I want you to do. Ask more, in the same way that somebody might meet a random traveller on the street and choose to accept a certain stereotype based on first interaction or appearance or judgment, whatever it might be. But actually, if you give any person, regardless of where they're from, 5 minutes of your time or the time of day, quite literally, you will begin to get to know more of that person. You start to peel away layers of that person. You begin to get to know them for who they truly are, in the same way that there's lots of layers and imagery and things happening in my images. So I quite often say I like to reveal as much as I conceal. And it's up to you, the viewer, to figure out what it is you want to figure out. So I hope that answers your question.
That's beautiful, actually. And it, almost the opposite. Like you had a goal you were trying to get to. I see it in my head.
Yeah.
I want to achieve this and work
Yeah.
backwards almost. Whereas you were just inspired going forward. Wonderful. But you, Edy?
Yeah, no, but I guess.
Because what you do now is very different than architecture.
Yeah,
So how
yeah,
did you-
but I mean, all of us have in common is that we approach it in like it's intuitive, right? Sometimes it's hard to rationalize, or you're probably lost. You lose the point in a way, but you kind of like do art intuitively, but then I think in a lot of ways that we ended up addressing kind of issues and things that maybe the world needs to draw a bit more attention to. The way your question was, how do we work?
Yeah,
the
how
way
do
we
you do
work.
what you do?
Yeah, I think so. For me, the big thing was also to be, to respond to the kind of material conditions or sometimes invisible phenomena that is kind of shaping our lives. And for a big one is technology and sort of science, and maybe this is kind of my recent kind of direction is to question science with art in a way. But yeah, I think. Sorry, I'm really loud. And I've been also kind of reflecting how actually seeing this work also in relation to traveling, and you mentioned time traveling, and how,
I think maybe lived experience is also part of like how you end up like, and I think maybe that's true for all of you, that like the things that you've actually lived through and things in your life and they come into those highly theoretical thoughts, I think, into the work.
Yeah, I think, that's another kind of, how do you connect your kind of personal story with maybe what I discover with like science, and sort of thinking, but actually I was reflecting a bit on the way that scientific kind of hypothesis also mentioned about like time traveling that is not necessarily linear, but then if you go to like fifth, sixth direction and sort of go different axes, and I don't know where I'm going, but I was
It's just
sort of
Which is great to tonight's theme, right?
But then I think it's like doing art is like constantly trying to find that language that would probably help me express my curiosity in that sense. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But thank you, Moran, for bringing these wonderful artists and inviting me to help the conversation.
Thanks, Terrence.
And thank you, everyone, for coming and for this.